Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys, the podcast of great conversations with men. I'm your host, Chris Foster, and together we're going to explore this beautiful and confusing mantle of manhood in the 21st century. Look, I get it. In public life, men can be knuckleheads. But in private life, we can be thoughtful, we can be reflective. If we have the right conversation, if we feel comfortable having our conversations. And we can all learn from each other's story because we all have a great story to tell. And as we learn these stories, we can think about who we've been, who we are, and who we want to be. And that's why we have this podcast, so we can all learn from one another and all of us get better together. And today we're going to have a conversation with my friend Eric. Eric has had a life of strange contrast from his childhood to his adulthood. Kind of an unsettled but loving childhood to a very settled, stable adulthood. Seeking mentorship as a child and giving mentorship as an adult. We're going to talk about how young adults now are overwhelmed with options and how we find our best path forward. We don't all know quite which path we want to take and why we want to take that path. So we talk about what are the ways in which young people can move forward and feel confident of the choices that they're making, to not be afraid to make mistakes, to know and understand that failure is not just a part of life, but failure can be the things that make us better than we were before and helps to shape who we are. It's an incredible conversation. He's a fantastic person. And I'm so glad that you're here to listen to his wisdom and he can share his story with all of you. I hope you enjoy this conversation and welcome in to Menfolk Journeys. So Eric Barron, welcome in.
I thought we're not supposed to use names. Okay, my name's okay. I got it. My name's okay.
Your name's great.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
A little bit about myself. So you prepared me for this, so I'm ready. So let's see, I'm 55. I am from New York, born in Brooklyn. Currently reside in New Jersey. Please don't tell anybody. With my 2 cats and my beautiful wife of more than 20 years and my 2 children who are both actually coming up on birthdays in August, about to be 17 and 20. So, which really means
Wow.
you and I are getting old. So,
Yes, it does. And they're getting older too. 17 and 20 are that's such a crucible age, right? It's this cusp of childhood to young adulthood. And it seems now most of our quote unquote kids seem to be younger than they even were 20 years ago, definitely younger than they were 100 years ago. Are you talking to them about kind of this cusp of moving on to this next stage?
it's interesting you say, are they younger or are they older at this stage than we were? It's funny because I talk
Right.
about that a lot with my kids and even my wife, trying to give them space, remembering what a train wreck I was. Because you knew me at this time. We knew each other during these
Right.
years. So I'm really trying to give them a lot of space, really reflecting on, was I much more mature at this age, or was I really not, or was it just different? So, in some ways, they are a lot less mature just because of how
Yeah.
they have been enabled to communicate, right? We use this, they use this.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
in other ways, they're much smarter than we are because of how much access to information they've had at such a young age. So,
Yeah, that access is so interesting. It is it's the first globally connected generation, right? And never in the history of the world has there been a generation as connected as this one is. They can see TikToks from around the world. They can see peers their age. They
connected,
can
but
see
connected
anything,
yet
anywhere.
disconnected. Connected in
Right.
a certain way, but oftentimes they think they're connected, but there's a very big emotional
Yeah.
disconnect creating isolation and depression. So it's interesting. It's disconnected but connected. Which one are they?
It's a great question. It's almost like it's a question of, are they loose ties or close
Mm,
ties? It was a really wonderful study after COVID, where they were talking sociologically about weak ties and strong
mm,
ties, and that what COVID did was cut a lot of weak ties. People you see at the grocery store, people you see when you're out shopping, um, your fellow parents in school that you all huddle up with when you pick kids up, or my girls went to ballet. Your kids are in sports, and you see all these parents in those
sure.
sporting events. Those are weak ties, right? We lost a lot of those. And so it's true. I love your insight that this generation is connected globally, but they're weak tie
Mm.
connections, right? There's no real emotional depth with those things, but they're aware. Maybe it's less globally connected, and maybe they're just globally aware.
Well, no, no, I think you're right though. They are globally connected, but once again, we could sit here and define connection is a like or you're gorgeous, as a comment on your Instagram. No, but seriously, I mean,
It is a
there's a
connection.
definite connection there. The
Yeah,
question is it is it superfluous? Is it not? Is it meaningful? Is it lasting?
right.
It's funny because
Well, it's
no, I'm just thinking about the conversations I have with my wife about how we say, "Oh, that person's an acquaintance," and they go, "What do you mean they're an acquaintance? They're a friend of mine." I'm like, "But are they really a friend of yours?" Like, so
are they
I
really
think
a
I think
friend?
each person has to
Right.
decide their definition of what a friend and an acquaintance is. So it's not for us to decide, and
That's
maybe this
true.
is the new definition of friend. So what do we know?
And maybe it's kind of like these concentric circles, right? You have a really close connection within the center of it, and then as it radiates out, it doesn't mean that it's not a connection. It's just a different kind. It's just a different type of relationship, right? You can have either Facebook friends or people DM you on Instagram or something like that, and you recognize that person because clearly there's a person usually at the other end of it, but it's a that circle is very
Mm.
far away from your close emotional folks, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's not a relationship. It just might not be an
But you said it's
emotionally deep
just
one.
different. And and I've
It's
been
just
preaching this for
different.
25 years. I do a lot of coaching and training. I always say, typically, when something's different, at least from me historically, and many of us, our knee jerk reaction is different is wrong. When different is
Right.
simply different. So why do we need
Right.
to define it?
Yeah, and it is funny because I think that actually my wife and I were chatting about um, kind of neurology and just different mindsets and about how people think differently. It doesn't mean they think wrong; they just think differently.
Period.
And so I think that you right. Period. You've got folks who are more introverted rather than extroverted. You've got folks that are more stable versus label. Right. I mean, you've got these different
Totally.
personality types, and it doesn't mean one is wrong, right or wrong. They are just different. I think that as these kids are moving into their their young adulthood in 2024, it's a very different contextual experience than we did in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. And once again, I'm doing my best, and I'm sure you are too, as a parent, to not say it's better or worse.
Right, it's just
So, because
different. So let me tell
if we
you.
go
So you
worse, right, our kids are automatically going to say, "Wow, you're just so out of touch."
you're
But
out
they're
of touch,
right.
and
But
you
in
and you
fairness,
don't
we
know.
did the same thing to our parents. It's just different.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. And they did back in the 20s, they did in the 30s, they did in the late 1800s. It's the way of the world. So, you are stably married, had, one house, one spouse with your kids, which is awesome. But you mentioned in your preamble that that wasn't your upbringing, that your folks split when you were a little bit younger, and that instead of actually having this nucleus where it's like you've created this family of four, you actually were a child of divorce, and as an only child, you have a completely opposite experience being the parent than you had being a son. Are you feeling that? Do you recognize that
Ever,
dichotomy?
all the time.
Mm,
It's all the time. It's woven into my being of how I am a parent to my children.
Hmm.
It's funny. I started laughing and smirking when you started introducing this topic. I said, I'm stably. Is anybody stably married? It's funny. The best piece of advice I had years ago was, and someone that actually worked with me. She said, "You're going to have some great years, and you're going to have some shit years. You're going to have to decide during those shitty, difficult years how you stay together." Because for many
Right.
people, it's the Staples easy button. We're going to get divorced. We're going to get separated. It's like everyone has shitty years. It really just
Yep.
depends how you embrace it. So, yes, we've been married, my God, since 2001. We dated on and off for a dozen years before that. So, yeah, it's a long
Congratulations.
time. Yes, very different. My wife is also an only child. She has
Hmm.
a half brother, but pretty much an only child. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and for a time, we talked about not having children for no reason except that, right? When you children, I always tell people, should you have kids or should you not have kids? It's a responsibility, and if you're going to take on that responsibility, be prepared. And that quickly changed. I
Right.
was like, how can we not have kids? And then we said, okay, if we're going to have
Right.
one, for me, to answer your question, we'll get back to it. Extremely lonely.
Yeah.
Um, and
Okay.
and extremely challenging growing up. And
Hmm.
we said, we're never gonna just have one, so then we have to have two. And then we said we're
Right.
never going to be outnumbered, so we stopped at two.
Exactly. It makes that
We're
that that
never
that,
going to be
that makes the
outnumbered.
calculus that makes the calculus
So,
easy. It's interesting. You mentioned the first word that you used was lonely when you were talking about being an only child. Some folks of an introverted nature uh, relished
mm,
being only children, right? Because they had rich inner lives, they could be by themselves, they had plenty of quiet and space. You're naturally an extrovert. I would think
you
that that
think?
would have been challenging for you,
It
right?
was.
And then
Yep.
especially
But I think, in fairness, to frame it a little better, it wasn't just a divorced family. And by the way, my upbringing was 1,000 times better than a billion other people. So,
sure.
everyone's got their
Yeah, yeah,
stuff. I know what I forgot the George Carlin bit, but right, don't call your stuff my whatever. So, someone watching this will remember that George Carlin skit. Anyway,
yeah.
it it was also, I had a very small family in general, even an extended family. So, right, if you're at a divorced
Mhm.
family and you're an only child, there still can be cousins around, right? And
Right.
uncles and aunts, and you could live under one roof, even in on multiple generations. That was
Mhm.
not the case. So I think it was exacerbated by the fact that I had a very small, fragmented family, even outside of the parents being divorced. And yes, to answer your
Hmm.
question, being a little bit more of an extroverted person, um, it was very challenging. And I think, particularly since I was my mother's, and I hate saying it like this, but I was my mother's entire world. She didn't work. It was me.
Oh. Oh, that's a lot of pressure.
And it was, great mother, right? Dinner on the table every single
Sure.
night. But as
Absolutely.
you can imagine,
Of
I
course.
don't think, I can't tell you she was a helicopter parent, because you couldn't be back then. There were no cell phones. I go out I take the
Right.
train, and she had no idea where I was if I wasn't picking up a payphone. But I always picked up the payphone to let her know where I was. So I had a lot of rope and a lot of freedom. But it was
Mhm.
impossible to be right. Parents, we're where's our kid right now, looking on the phone?
No, I
Um,
know. Yeah, I know,
Back then, they
right?
had no idea. I went out in the morning, I played hoop for 10 hours, and I came home.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. You went out, you're like, "Okay, where are you going?" "Not sure, either
Right,
Kenny's or
right,
Alex's or
right,
Bill's, but I'll call you,
right,
and, are you staying over?" "I don't know, I'll let
right,
you know."
totally,
And we took my bike, the 61B bus, and I was out.
100%. So, but that being said, I didn't even, we're so young at that age. I didn't even know what, as you grow up, even now, my mother, passed away earlier this year, and taking care of her. And, I'm
Start.
still reflecting
Mhm.
on aha moments like, wow, I never knew that. So I'm still unpacking
Right.
things about those times because when you're in it and you're a kid, we have no idea. All I know is I was very lonely. I had friends. I was, I was a good athlete, which at that age always helps, right? Because you're hopefully one of the
Yeah.
cool kids, because you're always picked.
Yeah, and it gives you and it gives you a a
Totally.
social connection and social
Totally.
network immediately. It is interesting. I find that I got more reflective about my childhood when I had kids,
Mm,
and I would think about myself when I was their age. What was I like in third grade? What was I like in second grade? What are they going through when they go to kindergarten? Right, all this stuff because I'm trying to be the best parent for them as they go through those ages. And I can't help but then think about my growing up years, which of course extend to your relationship with your mom and your dad and experiences you have with them, and they just come back. And I don't know if I was indulgent and always thinking about those moments, but I thought a lot more about my upbringing as I was raising my kids through their upbringing.
100%, which is good and bad, right? Because you're also, at least for me, reflecting on some painful times like, wow, I can't believe how lonely I was, or I can't believe how my dad used to treat me. And he was a good dad.
Hmm.
Here's the other thing I've
Sure.
learned, and our parents did the best they could with what they had to work with.
Yes.
Sure, there were some parents that were mean SOBs. So forget those, right? I'm talking about the parents
Right.
that were not mean SOBs, like mine, who did the best they
Hmm.
could with what they had to work with, what they were handed down, and where they learned from. So I think as you get older, I don't know if you've gone through this or have had similar experiences, and my wife has helped me with this a lot,
Hmm.
being Buddhist and me being the crazy neurotic Jew from Brooklyn. So we're very no, I'm serious. We're very complimentary.
It's
It
perfect.
is
Yeah,
perfect.
it's
It
very
is perfect.
complimentary. Yeah,
My anger, not all of it, but a lot of it has turned to empathy,
that's great.
right? So,
That's
wow,
great.
it's unfortunate that, well, let's not single them out. My mother or my father couldn't
Mhm.
love me the way I wanted to be loved or how I'm treating my kids. Right. So for
Right.
anger,
And
anger,
it
anger, like I can't believe,
right.
right? What is wrong with you? Why are you doing this to me? And that is decades of that versus
Oh,
like,
wow. That gets into your
oh,
brain. That gets into how you absolutely think about things, right? And I think that you work your brain in ways in which these neural pathways then become a little bit
100%.
calcified. And so the anger, right? And the anger becomes the thing where like you said, you're breaking those calcifications, if that's a word, but you're
We get it.
breaking those out to say, I'm going to be more
100%.
empathetic. I'm going to change that anger into
100%.
love.
That does, like you said, calcifications. What are they doing? Whether it's a word or not, we're adopting it for this podcast.
Yeah.
What are they doing for me?
Yeah, if they don't help you
They're
out, I
doing
have them.
nothing. Let's rephrase. They're not doing anything positive for me.
Right.
So I
Right.
could somehow chip away, right? My little
Mhm.
empathy hammer. No, seriously,
Yep.
it 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 unveils a softer side, which frankly allows me to be a better parent.
Yeah, and it does. It unlocks your ability to be more patient, even if you don't even know you're being more
Exactly.
patient. I found that I was a lot gentler in thinking about my folks. Because my folks split when I was 5,
Me
so I
too.
didn't know a yeah, I didn't know a family life with 2 parents, right? I just ha don't remember those experiences. And, there's all this stuff that goes on. They were both very loving, completely loving parents, and they like I said, they did the best they could with what they had. But I found that, even now I'm a lot gentler in my thinking of the worst times, and then what I realize is, and I go back and I realize I don't have these worst times. Like it's as if I reframe the story of my life in a way that's just the chapter and that's just the story at the moment. And so then I'm like, well, what did I learn then and what was I feeling then? And the reason that I think about that now is that now my kids are young adults. So I've got two daughters, 23 and 25, and they're off, right? I mean, they're ready to set themselves launch, and we did the best we could with what we had as they were moving along. And I think that it gives me so much more empathy for other parents all over the place, except the SOBs, right? That
Yes,
that that are
totally.
mean spirited. But to every other parent, I'm like, you're working it, you're good. And it also gives me more empathy to the children to say, there's going to be a time in your life when you're going to look back and you're going to have these moments, because we don't know what our kids remember as they're growing up. We don't know their memories, right? The moments where we did or said something. And so what I found is that as I'm getting older, Eric, I'm actually getting more loving than to everyone. Because if I'm going to be loving to parents and loving to children, well, fuck, why? Everybody is someone's daughter or son, right? Don't they deserve the same empathy that my children do? So that's what I've been
Uh,
finding.
maybe I'll get there when my kids are 23 and 25. Because I don't know if gentler is really in my vernacular. I guess, also just,
Interesting.
the times we grew up in. It's and playing a lot of sports, right? I mean, and I've been coaching a lot
Hmm.
of sports, and my son's a big time athlete right now. He'll be baseball in
Yeah.
college, and just different times, right? I fought with the town for forever about, and this that the last place team should not get a participation trophy. Um, and that's
Right.
it's just I want to set kids up for success, right? What can we do to put young adults in the best possible position to succeed? And one of the best things we can do is for them to be perfectly okay with failure. Period.
Yes.
So
Period.
that's some of my challenges, right? And society's changed, and I'm a big fan of tough love. Love doesn't
Mhm.
mean abuse. Okay, so people go tough love. You can't do that anymore. Like, of course you can. Just be professional and
Sure.
respectful. So it's more challenging today, though, to be super direct and super transparent for fear of saying something that, right? For people that are
Yeah,
right, right,
I
might get them canceled. I hate using that
they
word, but
right. No, you hate using that word, but it's there, and I think that the what you just talked about with, the participation trophies, I think that there's a swing back on that. I think that there's a pendulum shift going back to,
I hope so.
I would hope,
Mm.
right? Because the idea of not only kids being okay with failure, but accepting failure as a part of life. Failure is like it's like when you stub your toe, right? If you've never stubbed your toe, or if you've never skinned your knee, it means you've never been outside and fallen
Oh, I'm a
down,
good
right? I
that's the
mean,
ironic thing about it. What you just said, I think, is very accurate. I think if you surveyed the 23-year-old today, they'd be like, "Yeah, why did you give me a trophy when I came in last?
right,
Like, what are you
right,
thinking? Like, my parents are
yeah,
soft. So why are we doing it?" So I think you're right.
yeah. I think they recognize it. I think that what they see too is that as they get into life, and that life becomes bigger than they are, and the I don't know, the confines of how they grew up are kind of opened up, and they're actually living in the world, and they're experiencing failure. They're experiencing setback. They're experiencing months where they might not have enough money to make rent. They've got to figure that out, right? They've got to balance the books. Oh, my fridge is empty. Oh my gosh. And I've got 50 bucks until my next paycheck. What am I going to do? How am I going to figure this out? Right. I think that they're getting to this place where through just life you have to experience that, and there's no better teacher than life in terms of teaching you um, how to get through the times that aren't ideal, right? I worry so much that you know that kids are afraid of work, or that they expect things to be easy, because life in general is never easy. It can't be. The human condition
And
isn't
not just easy,
easy.
how about adaptability and
Yeah.
change? So it's not just about easy. My concern, and once again, we go through these cycles. I'm sure if we really were historical about this, we'd find some similarities at some points. But
Hmm.
adaptability and change, I think, is one of the most valuable things, right? You can give your kids. It's no different, right? Perfect example. And I was actually something happened today, and I was thinking of you in preparation for this. And I don't want to forget it, so I'm going to mention it now. You talk about
Do it.
reflecting on, how can we be the goal is to be have each generation be better, whatever better means,
That's right.
right? And my
That's
wife
right.
always reminds me of that. So when she sees me getting angry, she's like, "But yeah, look, you're setting your kid. Aren't you excited how much better you're setting up our kids than how your parents, set you up?" And but believe me, they did a very good job with what they had to work with. So this is not a parent bashing
Hmm.
session. It's so I said, "You're right." Right? The best thing I can do is ensure that future generations, as we stay all connected, are just set. They might be better off. They might not be better off, but at least they're better prepared. So it's
Better prepared, and keep going because you
no.
had
I
your
was going to
idea.
say. So literally, the aha moment today was I'm sitting here going, I have this Roth IRA for both my kids, and they really don't know about it. They have no idea how much money's in there, and they should be managing it. Yeah, everyone in high school right now throughout this country, I would assume most people like the kids are taking a basic personal finance class, but it's one in ear out the other, right? So most young adults today
Yeah.
are very ill prepared to manage their finances,
Right.
let alone do their own grocery shopping
Mhm.
or their own laundry. So,
That's right.
so I'm sitting here thinking, I got to make sure if and when I get the chance to talk about that with Chris tonight is reflecting on once again, if I was living in anger, I would have not allowed myself the space to go, okay, what can I do better for my kids? Right? Because I'm dwelling on anger.
Right.
So actually, the shift to empathy over the past 4, 5, 6 years has allowed me to be a better parent in many ways. And today was simply
Yeah.
even just allowing me to have more space and have that aha moment going, hello, why aren't they managing their own Roth IRA account? Why aren't they deciding
Right.
what stocks they want to be in? And this would go into a
Sure.
whole personal finance conversation. So um
It's a perfect entryway to that
100
conversation. I think that a lot of young folks don't even have enough of those conversations. We've talked a lot with our kids about our budgets, and we've been pretty transparent. But you just mentioned that releasing that anger gave you the
mm,
space. It's almost like that calcification opens up and breaks down, and suddenly there's more space in your brain, right? There are more pathways that open up. And, I think that, one thing that you mentioned that I want to touch on was this idea of setting your kids up to be better. We all want the next generation to be better, but the question is, well, what does
mm,
that mean? Does that mean financially? Does that mean
mm,
empathetically? Does that mean aware? I mean, generally, generally we're better than we used to be as a species, right? We still are stupid, but I can say that 400 years ago there was a social moray of owning slaves, right? That doesn't happen right now, so we're a little bit better in
right.
that respect in terms of saying, hey, we don't do that anymore. That's not so good. And I had a wonderful conversation with a father and his son who had transitioned from being a daughter to his son, and we're going to be that episode is coming up soon. And those social mores are changing too. Our acceptance of what gender actually means is changing. And so I think that as we start setting the next generation up, yes, of course we want them to be financially stable, but more so, I want them to be I want my kids to be more caring, open, energetic about creating a better world for themselves and their kids, and how to be more aware of other people's lives so that they can say, I understand you a little bit better. I read you a little bit better. I'll communicate with you a little bit better because I'm thinking about that. And so the idea of them being better, it's almost like them thinking of the world in a different way than I did.
Yeah, to me, I'll tell you right now, better is not defined at all by money and setting
Right.
them up financially. A couple things I've learned, and I preach a lot when I talk to other parents, is no matter how much we think we could define their path or help define their path, there's only so much we can do. Number one. So just
Right.
releasing that, once again, allowing us to not wrap it so tight is going to make for so much more of a better relationship with your kids. Number one. Number two,
Yeah.
one for me, when you talk about the foundation, it's got to be empathy. It's got to be happiness. It's got to be an appreciation for being present.
Mm-hmm.
We we don't enjoy the journey nearly as much as we should. And I can tell you right now, right,
Yes.
the basic, which should be a life principle, right? But the basic Buddhist principle is the only thing that matters right now in our lives is this conversation that's taking place right now.
That's
That
right.
is it. And it is more and more challenging, right? Here we go again, social media and connectivity. It's a wonderful thing, but it is really challenging for people to be present and enjoy the moment, right? You could drive by, walk by outdoor cafes, people hanging out in Manhattan, and they're talking, but they're also on the phone and they're talking. They don't even know what they're chewing. So if you can't appreciate the journey and each moment, why are we here? Like literally, that's one
Right.
thing. The second thing is if in relates to why are we here, we talk about there's a lot of people, there's a lot of good people on this planet that are very much into social causes, social impact. I think it should be the responsibility of every single individual to think about how they can make other people's lives better. Period. Otherwise, why are we here? So those are my two things about why are we here that I hope everyone
Yeah.
embraces.
No, I love that idea, especially the impact on other people. So your life has been about mentorship, not only providing you're a coach and you're clearly worked with young kids to really do coaching beyond just in professional coaching and being a mentor. You mentioned in your preamble that was also something that you were constantly seeking but
Let's just
never
open up.
finding.
Is this just? Let's just open up every wound.
Well,
Let's go.
not
Let's
opening up,
go.
sorry. It's hilarious. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Oh
But I
man.
think that's such a one that's such a wonderful balance of your life. I mean, so it's almost like with the stable family, you know, in contrast to, your divorced parents, giving mentorship in contrast to seeking mentorship.
I didn't know this at the time, but my life would be very different, not better or worse, very different if I had
Mhm.
mentorship from 15 to 25. Those critical years,
Mm.
16 to 25, 16 to
Yeah.
28, without putting a number on it. People get it. If I had a sounding
Mhm.
board, if I had not just a sounding board, because my parents were a sounding board, but if I had a sounding board that could take my information and provide me with really good, constructive feedback and helping me understand myself, what I'm good at, what I'm not, what I should consider doing, different paths, right? Because I always say there's kids are more fortunate today than ever that there's so many different paths to success. Oh my God. I
So
mean, I
many
am so
options.
jealous. I joke with my kids. I'm like, oh my God. Hey, that's what my daughter did a gap year before she even went to college. I was like, let's go. And I had to
Do it. Perfect.
force her for only one reason, because FOMO, right? All the friends are
Yeah.
decorating their rooms
That's
with, I'm going
right.
to Syracuse or I'm going to Wash U. And
Mhm.
she's like, well, I can't, but
Mhm.
if I'm taking a gap year, I'm going to be left behind. I'm like, oh, you're going to be actually so far ahead.
That's
And she
right.
says, the one thing she goes, I really thank you and mom for forcing me to do that because it was life changing for her to spend Spain and South Africa for a year. Um,
That's amazing.
so, but it's funny, but something I learned, right? That there are many, many different paths to success. So, getting back to your mentorship thing, it's I didn't have it. I always ended up being everyone else's mentor. It's funny, even thinking about the fraternity house in college. I
Right.
was the guy that looked at other people's resumes, right?
Right.
I was the person my senior year of college that had like 40 to 50 informational interviews. And you had to work to get those, right? I mean, there was
Yeah.
no computer, there was no internet. So, I'm
Right.
flying to Chicago, I'm flying to New York, I'm flying to Miami, having informational interviews, trying to figure out, like, what am I doing with my life? I'm a psychology major. Everyone's going to go to law school, everyone's getting their MBA. I had no interest. My mom's like, follow your passion, follow your passion, follow your passion, go into sports, go into sports. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Can I get a little more direction? No,
Right, right,
seriously. Maybe I would have gotten,
right, right.
I
No,
would
I
have gotten
get
a law
you.
degree and been a sports agent. That was never
Sure.
mapped out for me. And I'm not placing blame. I didn't have that
Yeah.
mentor, that guide in that realm. So I didn't know it at the time, but I enjoyed helping others indirectly in what you want to call giving advice, giving mentorship. And
Hmm.
to me, here we go again. I hate using the word regret. If I would have had a mentor, I would have been much more proactive and thoughtful in the decisions that I made. Once again, better or worse, who knows? But
Who
much more
knows?
thoughtful. And it's just pure luck. When I was running a mortgage company in the late 90s, that kind of someone nudged me, and we had a trainer sitting in front of us, and she said to me, you need to be doing this, you're much better than her. And I'm like 28 years old, and that was kind of the aha moment of like, ooh, that's
Hmm.
interesting. What does professional development look like? And then I started doing some underground comedy in the city, and stand up was great. And that was the
Uh-huh.
start of me doing coaching, training, and mentorship. No matter what position I was in, it was always part of my position: mentoring others, encouraging others, leading others, pushing others. Um,
Yeah,
and
and it's almost like you needed a professional framework to your natural gifts, right? It's
mm,
like you're all lit up with no place to shine, right? Like you had this yen to do this, but you didn't know in college, you had no idea that there was a professional development career path. Pff, how would you know that? Right
no
there,
idea.
it was impossible to know unless someone could tell you that. And so, what I think is so interesting about what you're talking about with your journey is this this energy and this life force that constantly wants to help other people and make other people better than they were
Mm,
before, and seeking the framework to have that applied in the most effective and scalable way possible. Does that make sense?
100%. And it's probably because I almost didn't do it for myself. So I
Right.
can't possibly let that happen to other people.
Right.
So in a way, I enjoy it, and I'm doing it for the right reasons, but it's partly selfish.
Yeah, it is. Well, I think it's selfish in a way that um we are always I don't know. I think we always act in ways that I shouldn't say always, but sometimes we act in ways that compensate for things we don't think we had or have and want for ourselves. And so by trying to give it to other people, we get it back
100%.
ourselves. Do you know what I mean?
That there is nothing more fulfilling than seeing someone, and I'll use a sports term, right? Just make sure you leave it all out on the floor, whether you win or lose. At least you could walk away and going, I just left it all out there. Because that's all you could ask for.
Sure.
And I could tell
Right.
you that looking back, which I'm doing less and less of.
Good.
I'm trying really.
Or we're not good or bad. It just is.
No, no, good. Let's call it good.
Good. It's
100%,
good.
right? I mean, you can't look too
Hmm.
far back, you can't look too far forward, but we can't ignore it.
Right.
And yeah, if you talk about, let's use the word regrets because we all have them.
Sure.
I wish I would have been more thoughtful, more proactive. and use my time more efficiently um, earlier in my life. Where where
Yeah.
where
No,
where
I
I
get.
versus making this massive shift the past couple of years.
Yes, yes, because your shift is in your 50s instead of in your 20s. No, I get
Mhm.
that, but the shift might be different and you might be ready for it better now. I do wanna get back to something you mentioned, which I thought was really insightful. You noted that the options now for youngsters are more than ever before. They have so many options, so many things that they can do, and, you might not need to go to college. Maybe you can do a trade. I just came back from a conference where I met a 27-year-old, call him a kid. He's not a 27-year-old younger man. He was making like $7 an hour doing roofing for a bit, and then started to figure out he could actually sell and hustle roofs on the side. Then he started his own roofing business. He's 27 years old. He's pocketed $1 million in the bank already, and his roofing company is a $7 million business. And he didn't go to college. He barely finished high school. So a trades avenue, it's easier now than ever before to create a business online and be an entrepreneur via Amazon or reseller or however you want to do, or just build a website and start selling stuff and figure out a business model and market it on Facebook or Instagram.
Totally.
And suddenly you can be your little entrepreneur, right? Or you can go to college and then you can try to get a job and you move up the corporate ladder. There are so many options available, I think, to people now, and they're aware of so many options. A question I have for you is, and as you try to mentor youngsters, do you think these options really are confusing and are they kind of overwhelming?
I don't think confusing, I think overwhelming is the right word.
Okay.
100%. How does anyone figure out what they want to do with their life and how they want to spend their days? It comes in many shapes and forms, right? Maybe you're introduced to it through one of your parents and you go to work with them and you follow in their footsteps. I mean, like I said, that's a whole separate conversation. I it's not just many paths. It's just how about being open to that your tastes are also going to change. We're not
Right.
our parents and our grandparents where what you did at 23, you were doing at 53. So being okay that the decisions you're making today are not going to probably, highly likely, not going to define the rest of your life. So I just really want people to take it in phases and steps.
Hmm.
And, I don't like people looking much past 5 years. There's no reason to. So, number one, the
Right.
world's going to be a different place and you're going to be a different
Uh-huh.
person. So,
Right. Yeah, I think that's so perfect. I remember back in business, they're like, "We're gonna have a 5-year plan." And I was like, "Awesome! Let's make a 5-year plan." Right, and then year 2 or 3, oh, better change the plan, right? Or,
totally.
and especially after COVID happened. I'm like, 3-year plans, 1 year, 6-month plan, maybe it's a
But that's why
3-month
mentorship
plan,
is so important,
right?
right? Because as you're living your
Right.
life, as we all live our lives, and it's what we say to people that in business, right? When I do a lot of consulting, and this is obvious for people, but once again, when you're in the weeds, you can't see the forest from the trees,
It's hard to see it,
right? So the question is,
right?
how do I get owners, right? I do a lot of consulting, particularly in the startup world. How do I get owners to breathe, step back from their business, even take a day off, right? The world's not going to end, the business
Hmm.
is not going to close, so they could work on their business. Because they can't work on their business if
Right.
they're buried in their business and so emotionally attached to it every second of the day, particularly if you're a founder, right? Because that is your baby.
Right.
So, how do you
Right.
let it go, let it breathe a little, and be able to reflect? So, from a mentorship perspective, when we start talking about young adults and career paths, it is overwhelming. And the first thing I even said to my daughter, it's okay to be overwhelmed, right?
Right.
Versus
It's
why
natural.
are you overwhelmed? Like, holy shit, like there's something wrong with our child. There's nothing wrong with them. I'd be overwhelmed today too. Just because
Yeah,
I have every video, I have access to all these career paths. No, no, seriously, right? I mean, people are doing all these
Yeah,
things. Is that right? Is
yeah,
it not? Is it real? Is it not? Are they really making that money? Are they not? Are they really living all over the world? It's like when she was traveling, she met these two guys, and one was working for Snap, Snapchat, whatever, and one was working for
mhm,
Facebook, and they were literally traveling the world together, working on West Coast time, no matter where they were in the world. And they were just traveling the world working. And she was like,
sure,
wow. I'm like, okay, you can't always do that. There's particularly for
right,
many careers that are going to be back to the office, even hybrid. So just let's not say I want to
mhm,
live the rest of my life like that because it might not even be available to you. But
right,
wow, there are so many possibilities. It's overwhelming. Yes, the answer is it's overwhelming. So what do we do about it?
mhm,
What do we do about it? And where's a
yeah,
jumping off point for you to get a taste, right? A taste. So you can get a feel, number one, what you're good at. Just so you know, well, the first thing I tell let's even define young adults. Let's just call them once again 15 to 25. And
perfect.
even though, as my daughter reminds me, there's a reason up until 19, you're called a teenager, not a young adult.
Right, isn't that funny?
And
Right, that's
she actually
hilarious.
just reminded. She's like, "I'm not a young adult." I mean, let's be honest. I say, "No, you call yourself an adult." She goes, "Really, Dad? I'm really a teenager until August,
I'm a
until I'm
teenager,
20."
right.
That
That's right, that's
is
right.
very
And
mature
it
of
is
you.
that
That is
is
very
funny though.
mature of you.
Right. I thought that was very excellent because also it talks about how she defines herself and her
Totally.
expectations, right? It's like and it's that, and I think that the overwhelming piece is that's actually a really good word that you use because all the input that they get, it's very hard to kind of suss out and filter
Impossible.
what they should keep. It's impossible, But you said something really interesting too about founders working in the business and they need to step back and maybe work on the business, right? Can't you say the same things about ourselves?
100%.
We're living in our life. Should we step back and work on our life?
I had someone years ago also, I don't know why I'm remembering this now, but say, life is one big dream. How many times do you look up and go, "Oh my god, it's 5 o'clock"? "Oh my god,
Right.
it's 5 o'clock" means that there was a lot of time, let's just during that day that you were not present. Now you can't be present all the time, right? You're getting stuff done, but 1000%. We could all be a lot more present and proactive in how we lead our life with intention.
Now, that's an interesting thing because when you start talking about intention, oftentimes it's verbalized, oftentimes it's with prayer, sometimes it's with a Buddhist mantra, like your wife would know about. Like the Avalokiteshvara mantra is really about centering yourself, right? And grounding that moment in time to where you are present at the moment. Um, and you talk about the intention. So I ask you, Eric, do you go through a ritual of intentions every day? Do you try that? Have you tried and failed? Is it start and stop?
So it's funny. I look at all religions, and once again, I look at Buddhism as spirituality, and frankly,
Okay,
in a way, look at all religions as some form of meditation, and
correct.
meditation is once again my definition. It just allows us to open our mind to the possibility, right? So I chant with my wife, and it ebbs and flows. It should be she has every morning she chants,
That's
and she
wonderful.
chants to center herself in her to get her thought, like what's important, what's not important. And the ironic thing is, and I say this all the time, the energy you give off you get back. So
Hmm.
that's what meditation is, you making once again intentional decisions of how you want to live your life and how you want to be either half full or half empty. So to answer your question, I have started and stopped these rituals 1,000 times over.
Right.
And it's been I've been very, very hard on myself, extremely hard to the point where it could even cause like mini bouts of, I hate using this word lightly, but not depression, but just call it sadness and frustration and mild
Hmm.
depression. And I
Sure.
only say that because there are people that suffer from real deep depression, and I get it.
Right. Yeah.
But because of, once again, no blame, because of the lack of structure I had as a child, and I was never punished. And the
Right.
one time my mother smacked me, she cried
Uh-huh. Right. She felt guilty
on the
about it.
spot. And then I felt guilty.
Right. Right. Then you felt bad for her being sad,
Wow,
right?
what a vicious cycle. So that disciplined was not ingrained in me at a young age and has definitely been one of my top 2 or 3 challenges my entire life.
Yeah. The
I
discipline
will go
piece
through
is
I will go through
hard.
spouts. The only thing that I could tell you has been somewhat consistent has been my ability to eat well and work out and stay fit.
So
And if you wanna say
wouldn't you
that's more
think though?
vanity and or what my blood results look like when I go to the doctor and all the stuff I
Well, with the
inherited.
work,
Um,
exactly.
but I could be better. Could be better at
Well,
creating
you,
some
I would,
structure. They say own your morning, right? Easier said than done, right? How many videos are you going to see? Like, I get up at 4:30, I take a
yeah,
cold plunge. Like, it's like what's real, what's not,
yeah.
and that's the other thing, right? My biggest concern out of everything we've spoken about today, as it relates to our young adults, and you talk about being overwhelmed with career choices. But I also look at that
Hmm.
as an opportunity because we didn't have as many. So you're overwhelmed because there are so
Right,
many opportunity. Like that's amazing.
right,
So how do you reframe that for them to say, "Wow, I'm a kid
right,
in a candy store. How do I make a decision?" You're in a candy store. So
right,
we got to
right.
help them
It,
reframe it. That's number one. I'm just as concerned about comparing yourself to others,
that
online
I think is the
personas,
kiss
because
of
I've
death.
seen people,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
looking at that couple and they look so happy, and I know they hate each other. But wow, on Facebook, they look amazing in Cabo. But they were living in
That's
separate
hilarious.
rooms this week. But once again, I look back and I go, oh, but it's so hard, particularly for younger
Right.
kids who are still more and more impressionable to how do we stay focused and say our definition of success is taking our God-given talents and abilities and doing something special with it, right?
Yeah, I love that because it's so easy to fall into a comparative trap.
It's
And
it's
especially when you're
it's
young,
running rampant right now in this
it's a
country, running
headspace
rampant.
killer. Yeah, it is. And actually, it's interesting too. I think you're right. I think culturally we are more comparative than ever. I think that the sense of, and it creates almost a scarcity mentality where you compare yourself to somebody else and you want to hold on to the thing that you've got instead of trying to have an abundance mentality
Mm.
of saying, okay, well, how can I help other people be the best that they can be?
Or how do I
Because
rip
if
the
they're
or how
worse
do I
than me,
take them
man,
down?
how do I take them down? Because if I take them down and they feel bad, I feel better. I feel
Oh,
better if they feel
so
bad,
vicious,
right?
so
And
vicious.
right, it's terrible. And so I'm wondering if that's always been around. I wonder if that's new. I think social media hasn't helped at all. And I wonder though, when you start thinking about what is a successful man, what is, what does it mean to be successful? Um, I think that is still, it has to be an answer that you can only have yourself. But everyone's got some type of comparative piece,
Mm.
right? I talked to an episode 8 is it's called a Golden State, and I talked with one of whom I think is, if not one of the most successful man I've ever known. He's gentle, he's kind, he's effervescent, he's playful, and he turned 75. He still swims with us. He has children and grandchildren. He has had us the lottery winning kind of career. He works as a paleontologist in the Natural History Museum in San Diego. And he, I know a lot of people who've made a lot more money than he has. I know a lot of people who have more things or have traveled more or have had professional success, but I don't know anyone who's more successful in terms of the how he's managed to live a life,
But that's also your
right?
definition, right? So, and
Yes.
it's also you've only seen parts of it. So you don't
Yes,
you
but I also know but what he shows me though, and I think the reason I say he is one of the most successful people I know is because I look at him and saying, "That's the guy I wanna be."
okay, because
I don't
he's at peace.
he
He's at
Right.
peace.
He's hit this place in his life where he's fine, right? I don't of course I've got goals. I don't want a yacht. I don't wanna do the things I need to do to get the yacht because the yacht's not important to me. What's important to me is a happy, healthy life with my spouse and my children and my hopeful grandchildren and all this stuff, right? And a career that helps me live in a certain way and have a certain life. And that's but you're right. It's my definition of success because he's showing me a model of
Totally.
manhood that I want to follow.
Yeah, it's actually something I talk about the past couple of years with my wife and as a framework with our kids is that how much do you really need to be happy? Right? If you look at
Mhm.
uh, every country except this one, there are multiple generations consistently living under one roof.
Right.
That is few and far between in this country. So
Correct.
much so that my mother spent the last couple of years of her life with us, as in the final stage of
Mhm.
Alzheimer's. And
Mm.
fortunately, I had a welcoming family as well and a large enough house that we could make room for it and a full time live in.
That's wonderful.
And
That's a blessing.
interesting, right? That you said it's a blessing. I literally had more than one person say to me, and I'm going to paraphrase because this is what I heard. How can you do that to your kids? Number one.
Interesting.
And or how can you do that? I can never do that. They would, how can you do that to your family and you? And it was, once again, what are my choices at that moment in time on those conversations? It's really only one of two things: anger or empathy.
Yeah.
So years ago, it would have been easily been anger and a click. Now it's
Right.
just, wow, you have a lot of things to work on.
Yeah, yeah, and it's we talk about that multi-generational living and the sacrifices that you make, but what you just said also was so interesting because you're now looking at that person saying, "Why would you say that?" Because one of the things that I've been trying to do is when someone says something, instead of saying, "Why would you
That's
say
why.
that?" I
Yep.
actually ask, "Why? Why would you
I
say
have said
that?"
that,
I'm
and I
curious
do
as
it,
to your
but
thinking.
and once again, to no fault of their own, right? Because assuming they're just not assholes and they're mean spirited, which they
Right,
weren't,
right,
it's just what they had to work with. It was their recipe, whether it was their massive fear of death, whether it was their cantankerous relationship with their parent, whatever, whether it was protecting their children.
the inconvenience of it
The,
all.
that was definitely at the height, the inconvenience of it all. And
Yeah,
it was just the opposite for me. It was actually giving me
mhm.
peace. Know
Mm, that's marvelous.
that she was it wasn't easy. at all, but it was giving me peace of mind and giving the family peace of mind that she was getting the care that she deserved. Not having,
Yeah.
the resources to say, "Here's a $500,000, let me go into this fancy," that didn't exist. So the only way I could give her the
Yeah.
care that she deserved was this situation, and I was fortunate enough to once again have the space and have the familial support to make it happen. So it's just interesting. Once again, definitely
And you know what
you
though? But
but no, the asking why and the curiosity and having empathy, and it really allowed me to have some very robust discussions with some people that
yeah,
led me down that path of, "Oh, I get it now. I get it why you're positioning it like that, because you would never do that, and
right.
frankly, I can understand why you would never do that."
Sure. Yeah, and what I think you've done though, is you've shown that was a teachable moment for your children,
100%.
without a doubt. Right? I mean, to teach them this is how we take care of family, even when it's inconvenient. Even when it's inconvenient and it's not easy, we still take care
But
of
let's call a spade a
family.
spade. Let's say that is why I've done it. I said to the kids, I'm like, "We're living in your garage. Don't ever forget that."
I
And
love
of
it.
course,
That's
my daughter's
awesome.
like, "Oh, that Zachary. That'll be Zachary, because I'll be traveling around the world." I'm like, "I don't care which one of you."
So somebody pick it up. Um, well, this is awesome, and I love this next stage of your life. And what do you hope um, that Eric from 3 years from now
Mm.
looks back at Eric now and says, "Ah, okay." Or is there a future Eric that you hope to become that you can see in your mind's eye?
It's a really good question. It's a really I as you can see, I've thought about this a lot, a lot. I mean, my commitment the
Mm,
past couple of years with, losing my mom and dad and a close friend, and
mm,
um, it definitely makes you reflect. And here's what I can tell you: it's surprising to me how many people I hear saying they're planning their retirement, which I don't get. Neither does my wife. I'm going to be working
mm.
until I'm not here anymore. Yeah, I'll be working on my own terms, and I might not be working 8 hours a week. But here's the deal: it's not work. To me, work is the fun part of what we do.
Mhm.
So, and frankly, part of work is also, at least for me, helping others.
Sure.
So, why would I ever want that to end? So, it's not like I have a window of, okay, I only have 10 more good years of work. I- I'm going to be an adjunct professor teaching 2 classes a week at 91 years old. So
Sure.
God bless those kids. Um, but
That's
but
that's
but
right.
but
They'll be lucky.
but I have made a commitment in the past couple of years to do a lot more work with this and a lot less work with this. I'm calling it
Wow.
heartfelt work. And why am I here? A rising tide lifts all boats. We've all heard that expression. I am
Mhm.
very committed to doing great work, whether it's on a full time or my side hustle in the young adult community,
Yeah.
particularly in the young adult under resourced community. I helped recently launch a project in East New York, Brooklyn, with a dear friend of mine who I went to junior high school with. And, you think we know about the have and have nots, but until you're really digging in and looking at that kid. I think we're old enough we could still call them kids, whether it's politically
Yeah.
correct or not, I don't care. These kids, and
Yeah.
and the resources between the have and have nots and the massive canyon that exists between the two, it's really
Yeah.
remarkable what so many of these kids from under resourced communities accomplish in their life without having access, or as many people say, they're in an information desert, let
Hmm.
alone all the additional social challenges that may exist in their lives. So I'm really committed to ensuring that every young adult understands that they have a talent, period,
Yes.
period.
Period.
And how can they live a successful, fruitful, happy life for themselves by putting that talent to work?
I love it.
And that is something that I'm committed to doing for the rest of my life. And I'm in a stage right now of figuring that out. So when we do our second episode in 6 months, a year from
Yes.
now, or 2 years from now, I'll have a lot more to share. But it's really that simple. You have a talent, and I don't want to say passion, because you may not have a talent for that passion.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think that's a very astute distinction. Talent's different than
very different.
passion.
And people
Some
often confuse the two.
sometimes, right? Sometimes you love what you do, and so you do it
Mm,
well, which it could be different than a passion. But what I think is so keen about what you said and keenly phrased was put your innate talent to
to work.
work. Apply the talent to
And
work.
know what environment, because I think that's also very underestimated, right? Use a sports
Right.
analogy. Why does someone thrive on that team
Yeah.
versus that team? Different coach, different locker room,
What team is best for you?
different leader, different locker room. You're still a great receiver.
Right.
So, for the dads that are listening, if we could do one thing for our kids, help them uncover that talent and do the best you can to make suggestions to how to put that talent to work in an environment
To
they
work.
would thrive in. If we can do
And if they
that,
do that,
then it's up to them.
they'll be
But then it's up to
successful.
them.
Yeah.
Then we've done our
Yeah,
job.
it's up to them, but also yeah, you've done your job, but would also think too, the you've set them up for
So that's
success.
all we can do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all we can do. Well, you're marvelous. I'm so glad we had this conversation.
It's funny. I haven't seen you. Were you at reunion?
No, I haven't seen you in 30
Okay.
years. You look just
I
the
was gonna say I
same.
didn't know if you were at reunion, and that reunion 10 years ago was some blur with 150 of us. I look the same. Yeah, I
Yeah.
had a lot more hair on me, go.
That's the only difference. So I have one final question for you, Eric. Who is somebody that you know that I don't know that you would like me to meet?
Oh, meet or interview.
Both. Doesn't matter. But just someone I should know.
That I know that you don't know,
Uh-huh.
and you're putting me on the spot right now. Mm. The person I did this project with, who I rode buses down Ocean Avenue with in Brooklyn during junior high school, Kirk Goodrich, who is
Perfect.
one of the preeminent affordable housing developers in the tri-state, is about to expand nationally, and is a great human being that wants to do his part in helping end generational poverty in under-resourced neighborhoods. You would love a conversation with
I,
him.
I'd love it. I'd love that conversation. Thank you for
You're
that.
welcome. I'm so appreciative of you even considering me. Um,
Oh.
I wasn't your first episode, which offended me, but you know what? I haven't seen you in 30 years. But super,
I haven't seen you in 30 years,
but beyond appreciative, and I think this might be one of the first video calls you've done. So
The
The
first,
first.
number one video.
You couldn't pick someone with a little bit more color in their face? I mean,
I couldn't have picked someone better. You are perfect,
Chris, thank you so much.
and I'm so I am
You
so appreciative
I
of
wanna
you.
say,
And
let's end on this. I wanna say thank you, and more importantly, I am so proud of you, a little bit jealous. So, and you've jealous in a way that you've given me a real push. The fact that you've taken an idea and you've made it happen. It sounds so
yeah,
simple, but there are millions and millions and millions of people sitting with an idea that fail to launch because they're looking for perfection, or they're thinking about it, or they're concerned about putting themselves out there. Huge kudos to you on this journey. And that if I could be a tiny, tiny, tiny part of it, completely honored. So big shout out to you.
oh, thank you, my friend. And I think that one of the reasons we get along so well is there's a fearlessness in our souls, and I think that that's a helpful trait. All right, my
Awesome.
friend, I love you, my brother. Have a great evening.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. See you soon.
Well, all right, Eric Barron. What a conversation. What a perspective of life. I love how he talked about the challenges that young people have with a possible overwhelming array of options in front of them. I also love how he talked about his own sense of finding a reward of mentorship that he didn't have when he was younger. And he captured that and realized that he could pass that mentorship on to young people in a way that he didn't have it himself. And in some ways, it's not redemption, but it plugs a hole that was in his life when he was younger. But he plugged a hole because of service and what he gives to others. I think that's awesome. And he's not afraid. He's a fearless man throughout his journey and tries to imbue that fearlessness towards others. Because what are we afraid of, actually? What is there to be afraid of, really? So what do we learn from Eric? That you can have a fearless spirit and you can give to other people and try to help them have a fearless spirit too. Be a mentor, provide guidance, do the best you can to serve others. Isn't that what it's all about? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. This was our first YouTube episode, our first video episode. I'm curious, let me know if you like the YouTube video or just the audio. It's of course available on Spotify. This is available on Apple Podcasts and any place you're going to get podcasts. And I invite you to book a conversation. Visit MenfolkJourneys.com. I'd love to hear your story. I'll make it comfortable. And I'd love to hear what you got to say so we can all learn from your story too. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Word Bid Filarid.